Welcome. Good evening. First, we'll have a message on interpretation.
Everybody, I hope everybody's having a good night. I just wanted to take a moment to announce our interpreting services. In Spanish, if anybody requires interpreting services for Spanish, we'll be in the back, waiting for anybody. And I just wanted to also let you guys know to please keep your conversations to a minimum or a whisper. There are mics all around the room capturing everything. So the following will be in Spanish. Hola a todos, si alguien necesita interpretación en español, vamos a estar en la parte de atrás. Si necesitan, allá estamos, y solamente para recordarles a todos de tratar de mantener sus conversaciones en voz baja. Hay micrófonos a todo alrededor del cuarto. Gracias.
Thank you so much. So welcome. I'm Ashley Stolzman, and this is Commissioner Marta Loachman. Commissioner Levy would have loved to be here tonight, but has a conflict. We are just really pleased to get to be with you all in Lafayette tonight to do a town hall. We always are really interested to hear whatever questions and comments that you have on any topic. But first, we're really very lucky to have a presentation on oil and gas from our staff that have been working hard on that. So we'll hear that. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Loachman to make some opening remarks.
Thank you. Buenas tardes. Good evening, everybody. My name is Marta Loachman. I'm one of the county commissioners, and I appreciate the staff support to get us here and set us up, and also the IT folks that make what I'm understanding is a recording this evening to be able to share out the information. Just a quick update in regards to, we'll have some information, and if folks have not previously signed up to get the advanced agendas, if you're not on one of the listservs so that you receive information about like a town hall like this, or if you know your neighbors and or friends who may not, please do check in with staff to make sure that you get on those notices. We have added a couple things in the last few years. One is in-person town halls like this and public comment area in the evenings, so that folks aren't required to go at 10:30 in the morning on a Thursday morning during typical work hours to be able to speak to your county commissioners. And so this is really important for us to continue and making sure that folks know that is one other way that you can access us outside of the commissioners at bouldercounty.gov email that Jen Churchill, who is back in the back, gets those emails and helps make sure that we get staff support to respond or gets directly to us. So just to make sure that folks know that local government officials, for us, it's really important that we're accessible and that you have a way to get to reach out to us. We have several different initiatives going on right now, but what I do want to do is just appreciate Boulder County voters for the most recent election results in regards to our ballot measures. For us to have now by the vote yes on 1B this year, this session, to be able to open up attainable and affordable housing in a way that we have never had in a sustainable housing fund source is really phenomenal. And for us as local electeds to be able to share and influence our municipal partners and our state partners to just share what we've been able to do and what we'll be doing with community input and our regional housing partnership is really exciting. So I just want to make sure that you all know that we are appreciative, and we're also looking forward to the collaboration in the future. And I'll be leading that work along with Boulder County staff, our Housing and Human Services, and again, the regional housing partnership. So just want to say thank you for our gratitude to that. And of course, the other item that was an extension on one of our open space tax measures, Boulder County voters and residents and all of the visitors that come to see us know why we continue to address our growth boundaries, that's why we try and protect our wildlife habitats and create the different opportunities for mental health by use of and encouragement of all community members to enjoy and utilize open space in new ways, including regenerative ag, our farmlands, and opening up opportunities in 2024 in a budget decision that we're looking at for tomorrow's hearing in regards to funding for American Indian, Native American, and Indigenous communities in Boulder County as a meaningful action step away from just land acknowledgement. So there's a lot coming along in the pipeline in regards to regenerative ag, the way that we care for our land and our communities and our residents. So thank you.
Wonderful. So with that, we'll turn it over to our staff to provide first an overview for us on our efforts in oil and gas. You too.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kate Burke. I'm in the Boulder County Attorney's Office, and my main area of responsibility is oil and gas. And we have a whole team of people. We're pretty excited. We have a whole lot of information to provide. We're going to speak a little longer maybe than staff normally would, but that's because we have so much to share with you about what we've been doing and accomplishing and where things are in the world of oil and gas. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. I'm going to let most of these people just introduce themselves. And Kim Sanchez is going to start.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kim Sanchez, and I'm the Deputy Director at Community Planning and Permitting Department. And I'm also the local governmental designee for oil and gas with what was formerly the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Now they go by ECMC, which I think is Energy and Carbon Management Commission instead with their change of name. But what we're going to start off with is this first slide. We thought we'd start by showing you a map of Boulder County and Weld County. So as you can see, there's a pretty significant and clear difference between the Weld County side and the Boulder County side. So the center line right here shows the county line with Boulder County on the west, on the left side, Weld County on the east, on the right side. The red dots and the lines that you see indicate wells and horizontal well bores in each area. But as you can see, there are no horizontals on the Boulder County side. There's been prolific development in Weld County over the last 15 or so years. And so over that time period, we really started to feel some of the pressure coming towards Boulder County. And in anticipation of that, have really initiated a lot of these efforts that we've been really actively working on over the last decade or so. I see nods in the audience because I think many of you have been involved in some of those efforts with us. The horizontal well bores and advances in fracking technologies really created heightened interest in the greater Wattenberg area, which is the area that's sort of outlined in yellow there, a light yellow. And so we really began to see more encroachment into populated areas where people live and our locally preserved lands that are of particular importance to us. The wells on the Boulder County side, I will say, indicate some success in this area that we've had with our regulations really sort of being maybe perhaps a diversion for operators to want to drill in unincorporated Boulder County. Right now, we only have those older wells. We don't have any horizontals, as I mentioned. And you can kind of see right here, there's some light blue marks. Those were laterals that were part of the blue paintbrush oil and gas development. They were proposed at one point, but those have since been withdrawn. So we aren't seeing those move forward in unincorporated. So this slide shows a site that's not in Boulder County, but it really is to illustrate the kind of large scale and consolidated facilities that we're seeing more these days. You may see some of these on your way to the airport, many of the sound walls that are kind of surrounding this rig. But the scale of oil and gas development has really shifted over the last decade to this type of development that we see more along the Front Range. So as a result, we knew that there's no silver bullet to address the impacts of oil and gas development. And when we first started thinking about this, we realized that we really needed a comprehensive approach to kind of get at all of the different aspects that are related to oil and gas development. So as I mentioned, over the last decade or so, we've been really actively involved in many efforts. So what we developed is this multi-pronged approach, which includes different things. So the first prong are the county oil and gas regulations. So our 2020 regulations, our latest version of regulations were adopted last in 2020. And those were a revision from our 2012 regulations, which were revised after our 1994 set of regulations. So we've always had a set of regulations in place. It's just that we needed to catch them up to the technologies and the type of impacts that we were seeing more recently. Our new regulations really have a high level of scrutiny over oil and gas development. They look also at existing wells in unincorporated Boulder County. So we now evaluate maintenance and repair requests to existing oil and gas wells, which we'll speak to a little bit later. We look at leaks and spills, and then we also require operators in unincorporated Boulder County to register with us. So in 2020 to 2023, we've collected over $1 million in operator registration fees. And those fees help pay for the inspections, the enforcement staff, the equipment that we use to survey oil and gas facilities. We do have an active inspection and enforcement program that's part of our whole repertoire to address oil and gas development. So in the other prongs, we also have, the commissioners have funded studies and monitoring programs to look at what's getting released from various oil and gas facilities and what are the air quality impacts related to those. We've really been active participants in state rulemaking, so both at the CECMC and at the AQCC, and we'll talk in detail about some of those efforts. We've been involved in legislative work, so many of you may be familiar with SB 181, which was a pretty huge piece of legislation that really changed the landscape for oil and gas development. So it went from really fostering oil and gas development to regulating it and giving local governments a lot more authority than we previously had. As Kate will speak to, we have been really actively involved in litigation wherever we can see opportunity to engage in those legal battles. We perform many site inspections, and then the county also really tries to promote and support many energy efficiency projects and programs, both internal to our own organization and outward to constituents and residents in the community. So our current state of oil and gas development in unincorporated Boulder County is fairly positive from our perspective, I suppose. There have been no new applications to drill submitted in more than 10 years. We haven't had any new drilling in the county for more than 10 years. We did have the Crestone Peak Comprehensive Development Plan proposal, and that was for pretty large scale development all around Panama Reservoir. That has been abandoned. We also were hearing about the extraction oil and gas blue paintbrush project, got involved in litigation there. That has since been withdrawn. And right now we really have only a single active operator left in Boulder County, and that's Civitas Resources, which is really Crestone Peak Resources and Extraction sort of put together. So Civitas is our only remaining operator. So, as the law has changed, we have always used the fullest extent of our legal authority to advance our own approach on how we address oil and gas development in the county. So as far as the numbers go, we have 215 wells remaining in unincorporated Boulder County. Again, none of those are horizontal. Those are all just vertical wells. So the older, kind of one well per site, around maybe a couple, and we don't no more than 3 or 4, I think, at any given site in unincorporated Boulder County. 74 of those are actively producing, 134 are shut in. 3 of those shut-in wells have been classified as orphans, so we've been working with the state agency to work on getting those out. And we have 7 temporarily abandoned that are in line for plugging and abandonment. And then lastly, we have approximately 91 storage tank sites, which we are also very actively monitoring. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael Sylvester, who will go over these next slides.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Sylvester. I'm the oil and gas regulatory specialist with the Boulder County Attorney's Office. And as Kim was speaking to, I might just go back to this one a little bit. Yeah, we have our number of wells has been decreasing every year. We're down to a pretty small amount of wells that are actively producing. The vast majority are shut-in wells, which essentially means that they're being temporarily suspended from operations, usually for economic reasons or whatever reasons the operator determines. 7 are temporarily abandoned, which is a little bit more of a classification that means that the well is really needs repairs in order to be brought back online, and really suggests that it's hopefully being on the plugged and abandoned list soon, and that the operator will be moving forward with plugging and abandonment operations. Here we have a map of the plugging and abandonment operations that have taken place over the last 3 years. There have been 41 wells plugged and abandoned over those years. You'll see the distribution really matches where development is occurring along that border with Weld County. That's really where the wells generally are, and that's where we've likewise been seeing most of the wells being plugged and abandoned. You can see the oil and gas royalties we've received in 2022 and in 2023. Though we are having less wells in Boulder County proper, royalties do change as wells in Weld County are being drilled, and the royalties do need to go out to all landowners in the area, depending on whether they have rights to those minerals.
But I wanted to point out, because it might not be clear why the county receives oil and gas royalties. When we purchase open space lands, we will often buy the mineral rights along with the lands. And when we buy the mineral rights, they often come with a lease for drilling that long predated our purchase. A lot of the leases are really 40 years old and in that family. So we inherit these leases. And because we now own the mineral rights and have inherited the lease, we're entitled to receive the royalties. But it's the county's policy not to issue leases ourselves. So if we own mineral rights and there is no lease, our policy has been not to actually lease those out. So I just wanted to be clear that we're receiving these royalties as a matter of these historical leases that we've inherited.
Yeah, and to further expand on that, the increase in royalties can potentially be thought of as showing that what development is still going on in Weld. It is progressing. Well, it has not been progressing here in Boulder County. These royalties that Kate just mentioned go to the general fund and are generally going to open space for the Parks and Open Space Department for their operations. With our new authority, we have required oil and gas operators to keep us in the loop and make requests of us anytime they need to do repair and maintenance work or pursue any plugging operations. So we review these, distribute them out to the various departments in Boulder County that may be interested. Often Parks and Wildlife has a lot to say. With their agricultural teams, their wildlife teams, and their ecology teams. So we impose conditions on these repair and maintenance and plugging requests, as well as plugging operations, which typically have to do with a lot of agricultural concerns and wildlife and plant ecology concerns.
I just want to jump in and to kind of blow the horn for our inspection program. It's relatively new. We've had legal authority to do this since 2020 when the state changed its rules and when we changed our regulations. And what with COVID and hiring folks and getting up to speed, we're finally fully up to speed. And that is in large part thanks to Michael Sylvester and to Rusty Crane, who you're going to meet in just a minute, who both joined our team in the last year or 2 years. So the inspections, we were doing the inspections at oil and gas sites. And when I should stop and say, what I mean by inspections is we're having staff go out to the sites and both visually make sure, look around and see how things are looking, but also using an optical
gas imaging.
Thank you, an optical gas imaging or a FLIR camera to be able to actually visualize. The camera can visualize the hydrocarbon plumes, and Rusty can talk about that. But we had been doing those for several years, but on a voluntary basis. And the operators were mostly cooperative and allowed us to come on. But now, as of our new regulations and after Senate Bill 181, those are now mandatory under our regs. And so, and we picked up the pace quite a bit, which you'll hear about. And we're also very happy to know that our 2 new staff positions and the camera that we purchased, all of that's paid by the operators' registration fees that they're paying annually. And then this year alone, which we're not even done with yet, Rusty has managed to do 711 inspections, approximately 3 per every site we have in not even a full year. So we're pretty happy with that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rusty.
Yeah, as Kate said, my name is Rusty Crane. I have a lot of experience in oil and gas. I worked in Prudhoe Bay for 25 plus years, maybe closer to 30, before coming to Boulder County. I've been with Boulder County for 2 years. I guess my title is oil and gas specialist, but primarily I do inspections using the OGI camera that she was talking about. I can take pictures of gas plumes and BOCC plumes and kind of quantitate them as well. And that's what I work on. I'm kind of a constant presence out in the field right now, 2 or 3 days a week, every week. As you can see, we did 711 inspections, so that took a lot of work. At any rate, a little bit about what we did. We discovered 263 instances of emissions. That's quite a few. I would say it's 37% of all inspections found some degree of emissions. And they're all documented with photographs and videos, as well as concentration data. I'm being escorted by Civitas, the operator, during my inspections. And one of the advantages of that is that they are fixing what they can along the way. And we've had 46 repairs of those 263 emissions discovered, and they fix them right away. And that's a win, I feel like. That we can get that stuff fixed right away. 85 of those emissions, they've postponed for whatever reason, costs or materials, and they're still on the books. So we hope to get those fixed pretty soon as well. Now there's a class of emissions that they deny needs repairs. There's 132 of them. That's mostly leaf hatches and things like that actually operate in a way that allows emissions, and they're supposed to emit. But it's old technology, and I'm not sure at all that that's a direction that we want to go. That's something that we're working on quite a bit. And of the emissions that I found this year, 60% of them are repeats. So if we have a thief hatch that's emitting a VOC or a methane, 60% of them were emitted again at least once. Some of them 3, 4, 5 times. I'm sure of. Primarily, we're finding gas emissions. We have one instance of a liquid emission, but it's mostly gas that I'm seeing out there with my camera and finding. And then again, I said here, the heat patches and the pressure release valves on the storage tanks. Those are the repeat offenders that the operators are denying need repair, and that's something that we're working on. Regulations. We do.
Thanks, Rusty.
I can just hop on real quick to talk about the enforcement we've been working on. So, as previously mentioned, all of our authority here is fairly recent, only since 2020, and we have rolled out this enforcement program in 2023 based on Rusty's inspection program, which started in 2022. We've been enforcing fines on all emissions above 500 parts per million of volatile organic compounds, which is quite a bit stricter than the state's enforcement. But again, we're able to do that with our newfound authority. And so far this year, we've highlighted 28 leaks and emissions over 25 sites, that being 3 sites have had repeat emissions, as Rusty pointed out. 12 of those have already been fined and paid up. Another 16 are currently, we're in the process of sending out fines for those remaining 16. And we're always exploring as much legal authority as we can to roll out these enforcement actions on emissions. And also here is a map that shows where the facilities that have been through our enforcement process are located. This would be counting both the fines already paid and the 16 that are currently being processed, with the red parcels being repeat offenders.
Can I ask a question?
We'll have questions at the end. So thank you so much.
I am Cindy Copeland, and I'm the Air and Climate Policy Advisor for Boulder County, and I'm in the Commissioner's Office on the policy team. And you've been hearing about the efforts focused within the county, dealing with oil and gas operations in the county. My work focuses on state level. So we're looking at impacts to our air quality and our climate. And just because, we've heard that our number of wells are decreasing in the county, but our air quality is still heavily impacted by oil and gas in the rest of the state. And so not just air quality, but, our GHG greenhouse gas impacts. So, if you probably know, oil and gas is a huge contributor of methane emissions. And so that's one thing that's really key to us in our work at the policy level. And oil and gas, you heard talk about the BOCC, the volatile compound emissions. Oil and gas is also a huge emitter of what's called nitrogen oxides, or NOx for short. And those two pollutants, the VOCs, the NOx, together in the air, they contribute and, they form ozone. And so we are what's called, it's a wonky term, but we're an ozone non-attainment area. And that area goes all the way from Denver all the way up to Weld County in our northern border with Wyoming. And so a big effort for us is to try to get us into it. This is something that's designated by the federal government, by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so we really do a lot of work at the state level, both the legislative side and the regulatory side, to try to get us into attainment with the ozone standards and to try to react and try to improve what's happening with the climate crisis. And so just this slide has a few of the legislative efforts, and just in the last couple of years, you'll see a number of bills, and not just covering air quality and climate like I just mentioned, but there's also there's been legislation for water conservation, just for example. So there's been specific bills on oil and gas, and then other legislation that touches on oil and gas. And so one big effort related to all of our work on ozone and climate that I just mentioned was last session. We had HB 23-1294 that was introduced as a really strong bill. Unfortunately, it really got gutted throughout the session and from pushback from industry and actually our state administration. So we're kind of doubling down those efforts and trying to come back next session with stronger legislation to reduce emissions even more in these operations. So then on to the regulatory side, I'll just cover what's on this slide is the AQCC, that stands for the Air Quality Control Commission. We've been really active in this space, and since 2017, we've actually used the counties, two work products from the county. So you heard about the inspection study. So we've used a lot of that data to inform what we do in the rulemaking space. And then we actually have an air monitoring study that you'll hear about later, and we use that data to inform our actions. And so we usually write up a summary of what we're seeing, what our researchers are finding, and what we're finding with the inspections data, and that informs what we're doing. And we go before the AQCC and we testify saying we need to reduce emissions, and our studies have shown that emissions are still high and are still really impacting our public health and our climate, and that we need to do more to reduce emissions. So we've gotten into specific technologies for oil and gas. So on the slide, you'll see Regulation 3 and Regulation 7. Those are the primary regulations under the AQCC that deal with specifics with permitting for oil and gas and with specific controls for oil and gas. So they'll specify what technologies need to be used in those operations and a lot of extreme details on that side. And then we get really involved in the ozone, in what's called the ozone state implementation plan. That's the plan that the state has to put together and submit to the federal government, to EPA, and those are requirements under the Clean Air Act. And the state has to come up with specific control measures to reduce the sources in our area that are contributing to that problem. And so for us, oil and gas is one of those key sources. With that, I'll pass it.
And then further on rulemaking, as you can see, there's a lot of work here, a lot of volume, also a lot of technical topics. And so we divide and conquer, both time-wise, expertise-wise. And so Cindy and some of our other expert staff work on the very technical air quality things. Kim and myself and other staff members in support work on the oil and gas side at the agency, although of course there's a lot. So at the COGCC, now the ECMC, we've been very, very involved in lots of rulemakings. As some of you may know, starting in 2019, after Senate Bill 19181 that we keep mentioning, the agency rewrote pretty much its whole book. And so there were 6 massive, endless rulemakings that entailed, that we were very, very involved in, and had some successes here and there in getting, pushing for more protective rules. We got a few things accomplished. We've been involved in a flow line rulemaking, working on the safety and integrity of flow lines, the financial assurances rulemaking, which is basically about how the operators bond and financially guarantee that once they drill a well, they'll be able to see it all the way through to the plugging stage. And then high priority habitat. They've developed a bunch of new protections for high priority wildlife habitat. And then they have to adjust those maps as the wildlife populations change and move. And then we have a big rulemaking coming up called cumulative impacts, which is where the ECMC is going to be looking at when a new well is proposed. In the past, they kind of looked at that well and considered how the impacts and the nature of that well, how it fits in or doesn't fit into where it's proposed. But now they are required actually by legislation to look at the accumulation of everything in the area. So instead of looking at each well project as a one-off, they're looking at the accumulated impacts of the development in the surrounding area. So that's going to be a big, important rulemaking. And then finally, we briefly participated in a rulemaking at the Public Utility Commission about pipeline safety. So that is the agency that governs pipelines that go off the well site. So this ECMC takes care of the pipelines that are on and near the wells, and the PUC takes care of the pipelines that go further and are generally larger. So we worked on that rulemaking that had a lot to do with leak detection and pipeline integrity. Okay, and then we have.
I'm Bill Hayes. I'm the Air Quality Coordinator at Boulder County Public Health. And first off, I want to thank everybody for joining us here this evening. So Rusty talked a little bit ago about his inspection program. And Rusty joined our team at Public Health about 2 years ago. But we actually started a voluntary inspection program of oil and gas facilities back in 2017. And collected a lot of data on what pieces of equipment most likely leak, most commonly leak. And as Cindy was saying, that data, that information was just critical in being able to go to the Air Quality Control Commission and push for tighter regulations, tighter emission standards. So a number of devices that are actually manufactured to leak in proper operation is now being phased out. Thanks in part to our inspection program. Another study, though, that I want to talk about is our air monitoring at the Boulder Reservoir. So we have a facility at the Boulder Reservoir that measures VOCs and nitrogen oxides. And it's co-housed with a state of Colorado air monitor station for ozone. And that was primarily stood up so that we could look at what are the impacts on Boulder County's air quality from oil and gas operations. And the study has shown, very clearly that the predominant amount of VOCs in Boulder County's air are coming from the Northeast, from Weld County. And so, while we've said there's been no new development of oil and gas in Boulder County in the last decade, the number of wells in Boulder County are going down. Development still continues in Weld County. And so this air monitoring station allows us to see the trends in oil and gas development's impact on our air quality. The success has led other communities to contract with Boulder Air, the contractor that operates our Boulder Reservoir Air Monitor. Broomfield put in 2 similar monitoring stations. Unfortunately, they just decided in this year's budget cycle to discontinue their air monitoring stations. City of Longmont has 2 air monitoring stations with Boulder Air, and the town of Erie does as well. And so we had great data with just 1 data station in Boulder County at the reservoir. But once the other communities stood up similar air monitoring efforts, we got a much more granular spatial analysis. And so that's really allowed us to go to legislation, to Air Quality Control Commission rulemakings with solid data showing the impact. And, of course, we're concerned about VOCs in the air that we breathe. But as Cindy indicated, we're more concerned with how those impact ozone. So as Cindy said, VOCs and nitrogen oxides, which are emitted from oil and gas operations, as well as vehicle transportation is the other big source of that. But so oil and gas is one of our primary contributors to the ozone problem that we have in the Front Range. And that's ozone presents a significant health risk for all of us. And as Cindy indicated, that's an issue that we've had in the Front Range of Colorado for decades now. And so studies like this give us the information we need to be able to help inform those state implementation plans so that we get corrective measures that will really impact the ozone. And we've talked about how oil and gas can impact the environment, impact wildlife. It's a quality of life issue with noise complaints, dust complaints, odor complaints that all come to my department as well. But at the end of the day, all of this work, I think, is primarily focused on the health of our residents in Boulder County.
Okay, so we have just a few more slides. I know this is a lot of information. We have been busy, as you have heard, out in the field. We've been busy in the legislature, busy at the state agencies, and we've also been busy in court. We have been involved in several lawsuits related to oil and gas issues over the last several years. These first 2 cases we lost, and when you look at the bottom line, but if you look behind the bottom line, we got some wins on the practical level. So we in a suit against the COGCC, they actually changed their evidentiary rules based on what we asked for in that lawsuit, even though the court didn't actually go our way. And the second case mentioned there, this one just came out of the Colorado Supreme Court. And again, they upheld the leases that we wanted to be terminated, but in doing so, they cleaned up some piece of new law that was on the books that was really unfavorable to mineral owners. So we're proud about that piece of it. And then we have, we were one of the parties involved in the suit against the EPA. They had originally kept Weld County out of the ozone non-attainment area that Cindy mentioned, even though that's such a major contributor.
The
northern part of Weld County, I'm sorry, thank you. And we, along with some other parties, sued and actually won that case and got that area included in the non-attainment area. So that was a good thing. And then we are involved in our ongoing climate accountability suit. This is a massive suit, has taken years, will continue to take years. And the point of it is try to hold some of the major oil and gas operators accountable financially for the impacts of climate change that they've knowingly contributed to. Okay, Kim's going to talk about some of our initiatives to get the county off of fossil fuels.
So I'll try to whiz through some of these slides, but I think that the take home from these are that the county is also very interested in walking the talk. So we have many energy transition initiatives that we promote and support. So from the Oscar office, which is the Office of Sustainability, Climate Action and Resilience, another mouthful there, they have sort of different areas. So looking first at buildings, they are focusing on decarbonization and providing energy through solar. Through our transportation realm, or in the transportation realm, we're looking at multimodal transportation and supporting electric vehicles, as well as equitable access to electric vehicle charging. In our internal Boulder County operations, again, we support on-site solar PV and subscribe to renewable PV subscriptions. There's a 2024 portfolio-wide decarbonization that is now currently underway, and we're converting our county fleet currently to electric vehicles as well. So I was also told by Oscar earlier this evening that 100% of our electricity for county buildings comes from renewable sources. So including this building that we're in today, that's pretty significant to see that sort of support internally. In my department, I'll also just highlight some of the projects that we've done. We've done some land use code amendments to help facilitate solar energy development. And so we changed the requirements to help ease homeowners to be able to have accessory ground mounted solar energy systems in a much easier way without review in many cases. We've also put in the requirement for EV charging stations in parking areas and at multimodal parking facilities. This was a big one that I'm pretty proud of. We partnered with Excel Energy to provide incentives for rebuilding of energy efficient houses that were being rebuilt after the Marshall Fire. So with Excel, they are now offering a $7,500 minimum rebate to anyone that's building to the level that they have to build to anyway in unincorporated Boulder County to our Build Smart program. But for building at that level, they're eligible for a $7,500 rebate. And they get more money as they do higher levels of energy efficiency to the home.
2 minutes.
And then our building codes always do incentivize all electric construction and offsetting of fuels. I'll skip over this one, but the slides will be available. This is really just to say that we have more support on multimodal transportation networks and including expanding the county's transportation sales tax in perpetuity. So this last slide is for Kate.
I'm actually going to skip this slide, but I'll just mention that now that the agency is called the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, they're starting to look at new energy technologies, deep geothermal, and they're also looking at carbon capture and storage. So this will be something that the same set of staff members are going to be looking at as we move into the future. So if you are interested in more information, we have an email list if you want to sign up and get updates. Here it is a useful URL where you can find more information than you can digest and sign up to get emails. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
I have 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to mention that if you want to see the air monitoring station data in real time, go to bouldercounty.gov and search for air monitoring. And then on November 16th, we had a presentation to the commissioners on the air monitoring study that was recorded. And so I think you can look through the records and find that videotape if you want to see a detailed explanation of what that study's found.
Thank you, Bill. Can we please get a round of applause for the staff for all that work? So we like to reserve time at the town hall to hear any questions from people. So you don't have to limit them to the presentation, but I'm sure we will have questions on the presentation since we're joined by these experts. I'm going to turn it over to the commissioner's deputy to introduce this. Oh, she has a microphone so that we can hear you. That's actually what's happening. But just before we go into question and answer, I do want to recognize a few special guests who have joined us. We have a few elected officials in the audience, so I just want to thank them for coming. We have State Representative Jennifer Parenti, who represents this area and east of here, so thank you for coming. We have Councilwoman Fahey from City of Louisville, and we have Emma Marion representing Joe Neguse, our congressman in the back. So thank you all for coming. Sincerely appreciate that. So now it is truly your time. Happy to answer any questions, and we have some people who have signed up. So first on the list we have
Paul Kellogg.
Yeah, my question is more of a personal nature. I bought a property up in the northeast part of the county about 3 years ago, and we're encumbered by a couple of leases, and was wondering how one finds out any information as to whether there's any activity associated with those.
Thank you. I'll turn it into Kate.
Did you want to?
No, I'm happy to turn it over to.
Okay. That is a tricky question. So as far as the activity, oil and gas drilling around your property, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, well, I know that there's a well. In fact, it may have been one that was shown on your map in the northeast part of the county that was plugged and abandoned, according to the way that you showed it.
Mhm.
And I saw activity there, and now they dug up the road that led to it and everything. So I think maybe it's gone, but and apparently it was a vertical well.
Mhm.
But I've now learned that you didn't have any horizontal wells, and so maybe I didn't have any wells under my property, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I think, do CPNP still, you have a map where you can contact CPNP, and I can have Kim give you the coordinates. Yes, the Community Planning and Permitting Department, and they have maps where they can, you can give them your address, and they can help you see, if you want a more in-depth look, which is not for the faint of heart, but the ECMC has maps of all the wells, but it's not user-friendly. You have to kind of work at it. And we probably have staff who could help you do that too.
I would just say, let's talk afterwards. I'll give you my contact information. You can come into our office. We'll look at it on a computer screen, or we can talk virtually or over the phone.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Next, we'll go to the person with the red scarf that had a question during the presentation. If we want to put back the slide, we were on the slide with the map of repeat offenders.
Thank you.
I think people in the back were having a hard time hearing on the last person, so if you wouldn't mind passing it.
When the gentleman was talking about repeat offenders, one of the things I wondered is if we find them and they're not doing the repair work because they don't agree they have to, what do we have in addition to fines to motivate them to correct their equipment so it doesn't continue to leak? Things we don't want to leak.
Correct. And that's an excellent question. So I'll try to be brief, but where Michael, or maybe it was Rusty actually, who mentioned that sometimes the operators deny that a leak needs repair. So let me flesh that out for you. The Colorado Department of Public Health Environment regulates air quality and emissions at all kinds of industrial sites, including oil and gas. And so they have developed regulations and certain thresholds. And Cindy, tell me if this is going to be terribly wrong. I'm horribly simplifying this, but basically, if the facility is small enough in its sort of air pollution footprint, if you will, if it doesn't emit more than, I believe it's 2 tons per year from the storage tanks, then the CDPHE doesn't regulate it. They consider anything going on there to be okay if the facility itself is that small. They also, under other circumstances, they apply a threshold of that 500 parts per million of VOCs that Michael mentioned. However, the county has its own separate legal authority to be stricter than the state. We're choosing to do that. So we say, we don't care how small your tank is, and we don't care that it's only 500 parts per million. We're going to enforce and we're going to fine you anyway. They say to us, well, this isn't really a leak. The state wouldn't even recognize it. And we have this argument. They haven't pushed it far enough for us to, for example, go to court on it or anything at this point. But that's so when we say they deny it needs repair, they're arguing that no, the state would be okay with this. This is a pressure release valve that's designed to let out VOCs on occasion for safety reasons. And so therefore it's okay. And we say, no, it's really not okay with us. And we're in this kind of stalemate. So back to the main point of your question, we are constantly thinking about what else can we do? How can we encourage them to change out these technologies, improve these technologies, shut down these facilities if they're really not producing anything, and go further than these fines. And it's still in the racking our brains stage. And we're looking at all those avenues.
That increasing the fines so that they're.
Well, as a matter of fact, we are capped by state statute at $300 per fine per day. And so that's what we find. We have been talking with policy-making folks about potentially getting that cap raised. But right now, that is our statutory limit. And that's where we're at.
Gabrielle Katz.
Had a question mark, so.
I didn't. Hi, I'm Gabrielle Katz. I live actually up in Heatherwood, Colorado, or, Boulder County, unincorporated. Anyway, I guess I'm interested to know what you see on the horizon, like in terms of oil and gas pressure into Boulder County. I've been very involved in our area with the Lookout Alliance when we had questions of leases and drilling in our area and also south of Longmont. And it's kind of just, what do you see on the horizon?
The million-dollar question. And it's always hard to say. But on one level, what we see right now is nothing. We see no proposals to drill in Boulder County. We haven't seen one for some time. We are seeing just now, we're starting to see some proposals to drill in Weld County. As you saw on that initial map where the blue ones. So this one that Kim showed you and the blue horizontals, that's the wells for that are actually over in Weld County, and they would drill underneath into and under Boulder County. And we have, so that particular project has been withdrawn, but we are seeing hints of some other projects similar to that. So, so that might happen, but there is a limit at this point. They can drill approximately 2, possibly 3 miles westward from Weld County. But that is all we're seeing. We have not seen or heard any interest in placing new wells actually inside Boulder County. Can't promise, what the future holds. But.
Question. I have a specific question. I saw an application from Extraction Cintas, whatever you want to call it, to expand the wells in Coyote on the Coyote Trails pad, and that would go under the ground near here, actually. So what do you know about?
So that's like, repeat the question. Yes, so she was asking about an application that she's aware of for, there's a drilling pad called the Coyote Trails pad. And it's over in Weld County. It's actually east of the edge of Erie, if that makes sense. It's like 2.5 miles, I think, into Weld County. There are 26 wells, I want to say, 27 that are already operating out there. And Extraction Oil and Gas has submitted an application to drill 11 new wells on that same pad. But these wells, unlike the other ones, would drill westward under Boulder County. And so we are aware of that one. We are watching that. They are in a very, very early stage, so we haven't yet had the opportunity to appear before the ECMC on it, but we're actively monitoring that situation. Did you have any other questions about?
Not on that. I have a question.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You were next. Oh, yeah. I guess one of my questions is about the losses that we suffered in the Colorado Supreme Court and what that means for drilling in the Longmont. I think that was, related to that case. And what does it mean going forward? Are we not going to be able to protect?
Oh, boy, that case, that was, So for other people's benefit, we had been fighting a case against Crestone Peak Resources that we initiated in 2017, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And it had made it all the way up to the Colorado Supreme Court. And they just recently issued an opinion. And one of the main efforts of the case was we raised 2 oil and gas leases. So as I pointed out before, the county has inherited lots and lots of oil and gas leases. We took 2 of those to court, and we were making a very narrow, specific, kind of wonky technical legal argument about the language in the oil and gas leases and that they should have expired some years prior. The bottom line is that the Supreme Court disagreed with us, and they said, no, that particular language in that particular clause and that particular lease does not affect it doesn't apply in the way that you want us to apply it. And so the leases are fine. They remain valid. So those 2 leases are over lands just south of Longmont in what would have been the Blue Paintbrush drilling project area, actually. And I think, or no, these were the ones that were south of Panama Reservoir. I'm sorry. So there are 2 particular parcels out of the many, many that the county owns out in the eastern county. So those leases remain valid per the court's ruling. And what it means is that leases that have provisions with language exactly like those and wells that behave exactly like those remain valid. But if the lease language is different, if the production records are different, it leaves us room to keep analyzing these situations. It just taught us that one certain use case, as my engineer husband says, that one does not equal termination of the lease, but there's other possible fact patterns, as we might say, that could. So is that?
Unsure.
Yeah,
Yes.
me too.
Larson? And just while we're getting the microphone back there to remind everybody, you're welcome to ask questions about oil. and gas, But you don't have to fill in.
No. Graceful. I'm from Erie, Colorado, and my question is multiple fold here. One is you say there's no horizontal drilling, but I know in our neighborhood, before the big 30 site horizontal drillings, they did some that they called in our neighborhood horizontal drillings. I believe they started Erie and then go north across Kenosha Road. So is that just not in your jurisdiction? And then equally tied to that, how long do these wells last? Because some of these in my neighborhood were drilled 20 years ago. And how soon can they just get abandoned? And when they get abandoned, do the rights go away for the drilling? Or if they find a new technology and a new depth, do they have the right to come back later on?
Oh, you guys are jumping right to the meatiest of all the questions. So to your first question, I'm not exactly sure. From this map, which is up to date, we don't have any horizontals in Boulder County. Of course, Erie does straddle the county line. So
This is in Boulder
it's on the
County,
Boulder side.
just south of Kenosha Road.
Interesting. We do have some.
They weren't the big
Yeah.
horizontal, but they were,
I think
not miles, but maybe mile.
There was a previous technology, I don't think they're doing this anymore, that they call directional drilling, where so the old vertical well goes literally vertical. The new horizontal wells, they go vertical first and then they turn and they go horizontally forever. But the directional ones would actually go diagonally and not nearly as far. So I'm wondering if that's what it might be. Yeah, so
That
I'm
could
not
be.
knowing the name of if you want to talk to us afterwards, if you know the name or the address, we could look it up and get you some more
Okay.
details on that one. But as far as the well's lifetime, that's a big, people will tell you a well could last 50 years. It's as long as it continues to produce. But for example, some of our very old wells in Boulder County, they're not producing particularly. And the operators appear to be waiting until they can, like you said, get better technology or some sort of something new will come along to make it more profitable for them to drill. And unfortunately, often those oil and gas leases allow for that. So, yeah, so it's a very tricky question, but something we're very, very interested because we have so many of these older wells dotted around the county. And we would like to see them go away instead of sitting out there and emitting.
My name is Greg Ching, and I'm a resident here in Lafayette. I just have a couple of air quality questions, and I have some more comments about oil and gas. Could you go back to that map that had the slide that had all the violations in this area? And specifically, yes, we're in South Lafayette right now, and I'm guessing I wanted to find out where that big red square is. A mile from it, half a mile from it. If someone could elaborate on that, that'd be great.
So you can kind of see the Northwest Parkway a little bit on the map. Are you talking about the very most southern square?
Yeah, the red
So
one.
do you see kind of the curvy line on there? That's slightly curvature. That's the Northwest Parkway. So that is just south of Northwest Parkway, but still in Boulder.
Can you describe it a little more? Like, is that industrial? Is it actually?
That's open space that grows broom corn. Like as you're going up the hill on Dillon Road
Oh, well,
on the south side.
I'll look for it, but what exactly, what would cause that? I guess the 500 parts per million cloud, the VOCs.
Yeah, this might be one we have to follow up with you on and get the details of what that site was. Generally speaking, the leaks we're seeing, as Rusty mentioned, are at the storage tanks. So their big storage tank sits there and it has valves on it that are specifically designed for when pressure builds inside the tank. They're designed to like let that pressure go. And that's where we end up seeing a lot of those. So my guess, without further details, chances are it was a couple of those types of emissions. But if you want to follow up with us and we can figure out the precise, what the name of that site is, and then we can look it up in our.
Okay. So the second question is kind of related. You know, I don't really understand what 500 parts per million VOC, what it really translates to. So one of the things I've done is that I've actually worked at a wastewater plant here in Lafayette. And one of the things that we did, I don't know if it's still true anymore, but we flared the methane. So compared to methane flaring at wastewater plants, what is 500 parts per million? You know, is it a big deal? I mean, that's what I want to understand. Fair to say a barbecue or something like that?
Me too. I mean, can't really give you a comparison to a barbecue or anything, but when it comes to specifically flaring, looking at there are certain pieces of equipment called combustors that are essentially kind of like a much more modern version of flaring where only it's self-contained. An issue is 500 parts per million is typically too low of an amount to actually get ignition for the combustors to work. So that is one area we've been exploring if there are new technologies or ways to pressurize to make these combustors work where we have sort of unpressurized, low amounts of unpressurized gas that can be difficult for combustors to ignite.
Okay, thank you.
I was just the intermittence.
Yeah, and they're not. It's rarely is a constant. These pressure amounts change in these facilities, so a lot of these times, Rusty will see a leak and be able to measure it, but 5 minutes later, it may not be the same amount anymore.
Okay, all right. I was just curious of the relative danger of that. General comment I would have is that I notice your regulations focus on air. I'm curious about water. I mean, that's what I've been hearing so much about water consumption. I see a lot of job postings for water transfer operators. And, for people who may not have other skills, that's a great job. You drive a tanker of water and you make lots of overtime doing that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of curious if water is an area that your regulations might approach, or if it's still covered right now.
Yeah, so the regulations do cover water use in a number of ways. However, they only do that for any new drilling, and we haven't had any new drilling. So the older existing facilities, as far as I know, aren't using water. They're no longer fracking, which is the big use of water. If they're using water at all, I imagine it's more for the groundskeeping, if you will, or dust control or something. So it's not an issue that we've had a problem with or an issue with at the older existing facilities. If there ever were going to be new drilling, we would be scrutinizing significantly where the waters come from, how much are they using, where, I already said where it's coming from, how are they recycling it, how are they limiting their uses, that kind of thing.
Well, my last, my last.
Related to water is we're also looking at the impacts on any water wells that are in the area. So that was a big part of our regulations as well.
My last question about water and oil and gas is that one of the possibilities you can do is your regulations is talk about the produced water, you know, the brine and things like that, because there are new technologies out at this point to better recycle that water. And potentially some of that brine could be used for extracting valuable things, maybe, I don't know, lithium, hydrogen, what, you know, other things in there. So I'm just saying, if you raise the threshold, that may, you know, either make it less painful to have that activity, or at the least, it might cause people to think twice. That's it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for that.
All right, I think that is everyone who signed up for a question, and I will just say you are more than welcome to continue to ask questions because we do have all of these experts here that would be happy to answer your oil and gas questions. Or you can ask us anything that you've been wondering about the county. There used to be a test sign on Highway 93 that said test sign. I found out why it was there. Fun fact. No one's asked us about their property taxes. Just friendly ideas.
Hi, Neil Fishman. I have a question that's not oil and gas related. It's pertaining to the proposed decrease in the health department funding of a little north of $1.5 million. Is there any specificity on what those dollars are going to not fund going forward then?
Thanks. Great question, Neil. So we have our budget hearing tomorrow, and we have proposed a 6% decrease in our funding for public health. So we have to make a lot of hard trade-offs, right? Whenever we do a budget, we try to consider what, like, holistically the community will benefit from. There's a separate board of health that determines how the money's spending and oversee the finances of the health department. We're responsible to the taxpayers of the money that we give to public health and ensuring positive outcomes, and the money that we spend in human services. So we've asked public health to start entering their expenditures into our journal system so that there's more transparency to the community on what the money is being spent on. That will also help us ensure that we're both on the same page about how much money there is in funding for public health. Right now, there's a discrepancy where we're seeing that there's going to be unexpended close to $7 million this year in public health, and they're seeing a different number on their end. So that transparency piece is really important. We've asked that they look at reduction and duplication of services. So where county programming and public health programming offer the same services, we've asked to stop duplicating services. And we've asked, like, as we continue to go forward, to really look at what kinds of things we can measure outcomes for the community. So, you know, if we have a desire to have high immunization, then we want to understand how programming will result in high immunization. If we want to have low obesity, we want to understand how programming will result in low obesity. So we're working together with public health on that, but their board will have to, their board gets to determine, absent of the county, because it's a separate agency, where they want to use the funding and how they want to make the cuts.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. So just related to the ozone issue, you know, I've been following this a really long time, and we've had this problem for a really long time. And we basically know what causes it. And the EPA, I think it was 2019 that we had a hearing where we actually were arguing whether 73 is bigger than 70, right? And so we're really at this point where it seems like nothing's happening at the EPA to actually get the air quality better. And so it leads me to think about, you know, all this, the stuff coming from Weld County and what else we could do on the legal front. Because you mentioned the suit against EPA. So I'm wondering if there's any effort there or ideas about how we could facilitate, you know, something really happening.
I'll turn it over to staff to elaborate more, but I will say there is one positive benefit to being moved into severe non-attainment. And that is that transportation funding begins to be restricted. and reduced when you enter severe non-attainment. So where agencies had a broader authority on how federal transportation dollars could be spent because Northern Weld and all of our area and soon to be other areas on the Front Range are in severe non-attainment, it will start to restrict people's ability to expend that funding. So people will start to make changes. I'll turn it to Cindy from our policy team.
Yeah, so some of the actions that were on the regulatory slide that I was speaking to are related to our efforts in that area. So that this ozone state implementation plan, or SIP for short, that's required under the Clean Air Act. The state puts that together and then that goes to the EPA for approval. We get involved in the state's rulemaking process for those plans because we have continued to think that they are not adequate to meet all of the requirements because they're not getting us back into attainment. They're not getting us below. There are actually two ozone standards. There's one that's a 75 parts per billion and 70 part per billion standard. And we're not meeting either of those in our area. And so that's why we keep asking for more control measures. And so we have for the last couple of years submitted kind of the same list of control measures or any actions that polluters can take to reduce their emissions. And so in the oil and gas realm, it's what we call zero bleed pneumatic devices. So the devices that don't leak any of that gas with these leaks that you're hearing about. And there's transportation measures. So we've actually sent this list of measures to the Regional Air Quality Council or the RAC. We've sent that to CDPHE and the Air Quality Control Commission. We are actually in the hearing next week on the latest ozone plan. And we will again repeat that list of control measures because the state has incrementally added new control measures, but it just hasn't been enough. And we actually also, I think a year ago, submitted that list of measures to the EPA, to the regional office in Denver, and spoke with the EPA about that. And just, we continue to ask for that. And when I say we, it's kind of a collective we, because we usually work with a number of other local governments in the non-attainment area. So Denver, Broomfield, Longmont, Erie, there's a lot of local governments that get involved in this. And so we just keep pushing and asking for more. One thing is that, EPA and the state, of course they follow the Clean Air Act, but maybe not to the degree that I would like them to, because they do kind of some negotiation and don't, there are times when actually, we sent letters to the EPA and said, you should disapprove this SIP. We asked them to, EPA, when they approve these plans, they put it in the Federal Register notice. It's a, legal EPA action, and they can take a step to do what's called disapproving it rather than approving it. And we've asked them to disapprove plans, and that hasn't happened. There's been a negotiation process instead, and kind of letting the state go back and work on their plan, which is what we're seeing with this rulemaking next week. So yeah, there are just certainly steps. Pressure from the public is certainly helpful, at the EPA level, the state level, every level. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. The second question relates to the airport, and I'm sort of formulating this as I go here. So just bear with me because I was thinking about how it kind of relates to all this. But there's, a very active discussion about Boulder Airport, which is, I understand, is operated by the city. And there's actually, when you think about it, I don't know, there's like 2 or 3 airports in Boulder County. And I don't think there's any talk of the Longmont one being restricted. But I wonder, since we basically understand these to be luxury emissions, these are basically unnecessary emissions, unnecessary impacts on air quality. And I wonder, kind of in longer term, how you see that fitting into our climate and sustainability goals, but also what role Boulder County is playing now on some of those actions, since it really affects us. Like, we live in Gun Barrel, the airport's a huge impact on us, but it's not just the noise, right? It's really an environmental impact. That's a much bigger issue, so.
Thank you. And we split these sort of by who's the team lead on the various topics. And so I'm the team lead on airport. I'm not hogging the mic from my colleague. And I could just hand it to her and go. So we are working on aviation issues from a number of fronts. Airport noise is the predominant issue we hear about from constituents from Rocky Mountain Metro Airport, but also the impacts from carbon emissions and the lead in fuel. So both Boulder Municipal and Longmont and Rocky Mountain Metro all have plans to move away from leaded fuel, but it's a very slow path. And so we continue to be concerned about lead from aviation. And when you look at our emissions, transportation emissions are very high and aviation emissions are very high because of the way the fuel works in the engine and just how much fuel it takes to move at that speed and fly through the air. We are severely restricted on our authority to regulate aviation. The Federal Aviation Administration was made to promote the expansion of aviation. And so everything is written for promoting an expansion kind of positioning. There likely is something, whichever jurisdiction the airport is in could do to tax fuel, to do other things, but it would have an impact on their grant assurances from the FAA. So if you are to pass a local aviation fuel tax, you then are no longer eligible for these grant assurances that airports need to be able to do things like repave their runways and remedy other things. And so people often are very hesitant to do it because they'll really severely lose out on other funding. And so the areas in the country where you have seen them pass is areas where the community has been able to get an initiative to get something done like that. So in the city of Boulder, there's actually a lot of really interesting discussion right now because the community owns the airport and the community's experiencing the externalities from the airport. And so there's some really interesting conversation and we should all stay engaged in that and stay tuned with that. But ultimately, the city of Boulder council members are the deciders. The really challenging thing for us with Rocky Mountain Metro Airport is that the airport is in the control of Jefferson County and that decision is held by Jefferson County for most things. But the externalities are largely borne by Boulder County residents. The flights are almost all coming north. The noise, the emissions, the routes are all coming north for the training and what's going on over us. So there's sort of a mismatch of who's experiencing the negative consequence and where the decision making is happening. And so that's one of the challenges with the Rocky Mountain conversation.
The first is essentially having to do with cumulative impacts. And, I know you're focusing on ozone in terms of what's measured at the reservoir. But you must have found other chemicals as well, like benzene and all that. Are you using this in your testimony regarding the cumulative impact?
Yeah, kind of. So yeah, we're not solely focused on ozone. And like Bill mentioned, the state owns the ozone monitor at the station. So the monitoring that the county does is the BOCs and NOx and methane. So, one key thing is that we know that methane from our study actually decrease. But on cumulative impacts, we certainly use that. We sent a letter to the ECMC a month or so ago, talking about the air quality impacts and other cumulative impacts. And we certainly use that information because, of course, HAPs or air toxics are related to cumulative impacts. And so we actually use that ECMC and at the AQCC when there's been this last spring, there was a rulemaking on increased monitoring and modeling requirements for oil and gas operations. And that was key to our testimony. We wanted the state to be a lot more protective than they ended up being of disproportionately impacted communities because of air toxics and cumulative impacts.
Okay. I have one comment and then go ahead.
If I could just add a little bit to that, the cumulative impacts is really an emerging area, both in public health science and regulation. When we talk about benzene, xylene, toluene, traditionally there are limits for each individual pollutant. And what we're seeing most recently with the Suncor air monitoring, some of the regulation around the Suncor emissions is looking at those cumulative impacts, because they've been able to basically stand back and say, look, we're not violating any of these health limits. But it's obvious that long-term chronic exposure to all of those pollutants, even if they're not above the health limit, definitely has significant negative health impacts. So it's an emerging area.
Thank you.
Actually, just one more quick thing. In the planning arena, land use planning arena, it's actually a very common practice. So we've been analyzing cumulative impacts for, it's just part of our planning curriculum to look at what's occurring in an area, what is that collectively doing to an area, given all of the other land uses around that. So that's one of the messages we're really trying to drive at the ECMC rulemaking, is to not just focus on air quality or a particular air quality toxin, but to look at traffic, lighting, noise, all these other things together and how they impact residents.
Oh, the word cumulative. Yeah. Okay,
And then this is the second to last question if it's fast, and if it's a long. it's the
one
last
last question. I'm really hoping the EPA rule on methane helps us. But the other one concerns leaking well that some friends mentioned recently, or leaking, they're plugging the well. And this is in Erie, and it's just off of Erie Parkway, and it's on the Boulder County side. Do you get involved in cases like that and expect Erie to handle it? Last question.
Yeah, if it's inside Erie's town limits, it's their legal jurisdiction. We work cooperatively together. So if they needed or wanted some help or support, we'd absolutely be giving it. Erie has a pretty active program. They have a very active oil and gas manager. I'm not sure what his title is, and they do some inspection. And I think, Rusty, have you done some things inside Erie?
Accidentally, it's not. Some of those jurisdictional boundaries are kind of tight.
Yeah.
You know, which ones are ours and which ones, but we've got them figured out.
Yeah, but if they were to ever want our support, we'd actually be right there with them.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Lochimin to close us out this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's always fun to be one in person, but also in our new facility. So folks who are here and haven't been here before, I would encourage you, as I say, every time we're all together, who's not in the room this evening? And what's our opportunity and our responsibility to introduce them to Boulder County, to services, and even to this facility, to be able to access services and get to know Boulder County staff who in and day out are providing not just the best in public service, but also the best in commitment to helping people move forward and thrive in this area. We acknowledge that we are in significantly difficult times. We acknowledge that even with an almost $600 million budget and those decisions that we have to make tomorrow, that we are, as an organization, in a structural deficit. So when we are looking at where we are with our budget, with the commitments, with how we are going to resource, understanding that our 7-county area right now is looking at more than a $250 million cliff in American Rescue Plan Act funding, which is an item that is concerning to all of us when we talk about housing services, human services, community services, public health, and all of the other services that our community residents need, that we are listening, that we are looking for ideas, we are looking for solutions, and we also take very seriously, I believe, this Board of County Commissioners, our responsibility in fiscal responsibility to ensure that we don't duplicate services, that we do give effective resources, that we are connecting everybody in our community who has not yet found the door to Boulder County as a resource. And so I want to encourage all of you to help us do that, to talk with your neighbors, talk with your friends. When we start talking about the holiday season, which I'm very excited about. So my staff already know that's a gift that we can give to our neighbors who are not connected. We can't afford to wait for the next crisis that will happen in Boulder County. We also know that we have community members, we have young people, we have students who have faced learning loss, who have struggled with the murder that's happened in the last couple of years here, who have struggled with COVID and those long-term effects, both health-wise and otherwise. And we know that we have community members who are dealing with inflation, property tax rises, and all of the other pieces. And so what can we all do collectively together is share the resources and share the wealth and the knowledge and expertise that Boulder County staff, we have 2,700 employees that we have put first and forward in this budget process to address compensation, minimum wage at a county level in our own organization for our own employees. And so I just want to thank you all for being here, for being open to learn more about local government, and for taking the message to your neighbors, to your friends in your neighborhoods and your communities during this season. And I just want to, again, give a deep appreciation to our staff, to the interpreters that are here to continue to offer services in both Spanish and English to our community members. And thank you all for being here.
Boulder County average.
They didn't.
You're right.
I'm laughing because I already tried most of